Congressman John Katko has had a busy first term in office, speaking out early on what some have called an epidemic in drug abuse here in central New York. But of course, he's also worked extensively on homeland security and a number of other issues. We'll talk about those topics and many more, but first, welcome to this edition of Central here on Fox 68 and My 43. I'm Daniel Pluff. Glad to have you with us, and we are very happy to welcome to the studio for the first time Congressman John Katko. Pleasure having you with us live in studio. Before we begin, I've got a number of topics, but I should mention representing the 24th Congressional District, which I believe covers all of Onondaga, Cayuga, and Wayne counties?
Yes, in the western portion of Oswego County, including the cities of Fulton and Oswego.
Let's not leave them out.
That's right.
You're on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee as well as Homeland Security.
That's correct.
You've got enough to do.
I'm very busy, to say the least.
I've gone through and in no particular order, Congressman, just kind of picked up on some topics that I thought were important. Again, not one more important than the other, but we'll bob around a little bit and hopefully get to as many of them as we can. But I thought I would start with something that's been troubling me, frankly, personally, and that is not just the presence, but the high levels of drug abuse right here. And what's most troubling is it seems to be getting a little bit worse. I mean, we're talking about heroin, of all things. And I guess before we get too far into it, how did we get to this point? I mean, how did this become such a popular thing?
Well, that's a great question. I was a 20-year federal prosecutor doing organized crime cases. I saw all manner of drugs that are trending in this country and all manner of permutations of the drugs and different uses of the drugs. A lot of times it led to addictions. A lot of times they led to crime and other problems.
Nothing good.
Right, but I've never seen anything like heroin. The number of people dying from heroin overdoses in this country is stunning. In fact, it's a half-hour show. By the time the show is over, three more people, at least in this country, will have died of a drug overdose, and almost all of them are heroin. And it's just a lethal drug. It is coming in through most prominently through the southwest border, across the border. The Colombians are doing it, and the Mexicans are doing it, as well as Asians, but it's primarily Colombia and Mexico. And it is a poison that is infecting not just, when we were growing up, people would think of heroin as somebody using it in an inner city, in a dark alley, underneath a bridge or something.
Correct.
Well, you have high school kids, you have athletes, you have suburban people, you have rural people. It's ubiquitous, and it is, I would say, the biggest drug epidemic we've seen in my career.
And I am in no way condoning or saying it's okay, alcoholism, minor drinking, underage drinking, but again, heroin, we're so far removed from, teens getting a six-pack of beer. It's freaky. I mean, what can be done? What are we doing?
Well, we're doing a lot. I think the number one thing we needed to do is we've accomplished that, and that is raising the awareness. That was job one. And once you raise the awareness,
I'll give you that.
Then you get action. So we had 6 town halls across the district, and they're stunning. May
I just say, if memory serves, you'll get credit where it's due, I guess. But you, as I mentioned earlier, you were a little bit early on this issue, if I could. I remember seeing, I think it was a commentary in the Syracuse Post-Standard way back in March of 2016, where you called this an epidemic, but you said something in there that I couldn't quite understand. You said law enforcement is doing all they can with it, but you said our laws are not keeping pace with the problem, and I didn't know what you meant by that. Heroin's illegal. What else can we do?
Oh, there's a lot of things we can do. I think, first of all, incarcerating individuals who are drug users in the state level in particular, or if they're low-level federal criminals, will maybe stop the problem for a few minutes, but when they get back on the street, it's a problem again.
Right.
You have to figure out a way to treat these individuals and get them off drugs. I think the development and expansion of drug courts for low-level drug users, I think is really important, because it really puts the incentive from a legal standpoint for them to get clean. So that's one thing. We're definitely not keeping pace from that side. We're definitely not keeping pace from a treatment side or a prevention side. And from a criminal side, I think we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater to some extent. We're watering down a lot of the sentences for drug traffickers. And if you're a professional drug dealer, you should not have, the sentences should not be reduced like they have been on the federal level.
Is it because there's just so darn many of them?
Well,
I mean, are the courts overloaded with this?
I think the narrative's been blurred. I think they say, well, there's a ton of people in prison that are drug users. Well, in the federal system, we don't prosecute drug users. We prosecute people that are involved in criminal conduct. If they're drug users, that's an adjunct to it. And we just, I think we've got to take a good look. If someone's a professional drug dealer, they should be treated very severely, especially with respect to drugs that are killing people.
Although I like the first part of the argument, or your comment, in that, like everybody else, I read Freakonomics, and the authors talk about different ways of looking at things in society. And if you believe what they say this whole war on drugs has really not worked, because every time you bust a dealer or some sort, another one pops up because the demand is still there. So maybe we've got to look at the treatment side.
There's no question.
Which I don't know if we're doing.
We are doing it. And in fact, we just passed something in Congress called the CARA Act, or Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act. And it's been signed into law. And in fact, I had a piece of legislation that was swept up into that and signed by the president, going after drug kingpins. But it's a three-pronged approach. Number one is law enforcement, but number two is prevention, and number three is treatment. With a drug that's killing people, prevention and treatment are critically important, and it expands the grant process, expands the availability of funds to treat people. And I'll give you an example. Krauss chemical dependency will treat anywhere from 500 to 600 people at a time for heroin addiction. They have a waiting list that sometimes approaches 500 to 600 people.
Jeepers.
And a lot of those people don't make it to addiction. If they wait 3 months to 6 months to get treatment, or a year or whatever, that's a problem. And treating someone for a couple hours and then saying they're going to be okay, no, it's a long process.
Yeah.
And the CARA Act, which we just passed and signed into law, is going to make a big difference, I think.
Let me move into another topic that's equally troubling, and that is, Syracuse. Talk about a wake-up call. Syracuse unfortunately got this distinction of having one of the highest poverty levels in the country, and I think that hit some people by surprise to some extent. But again, kind of a similar question. In your view, how did so many in our community become so impoverished?
Well, I think it's if you wanted to point to one thing, in my opinion, it's over the last generation we've lost 30,000 manufacturing jobs. And when you lose 30,000 manufacturing jobs in a city our size and a county our size, that is a stepping stone out of poverty. To me, a lot of times that's entry level into the middle class is manufacturing jobs, and they're gone. And
probably, sir, probably not coming back.
Well, I see. That's where I disagree.
Okay.
We can talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about the poverty for a second. So first of all, you have to recognize that poverty is an issue, and once you know that poverty is an issue, then you got to figure out how to address it in a multi-pronged approach. But the symptoms are jobs and the economy, which we can talk about. But how to address it now that it's here is a big thing. And I think in the inner city, the poverty rate amongst African Americans and Hispanics is #1 in the country. And the fallout from that is very clear: a 50% graduation rate from high school.
Yeah.
Just up the road in Rochester, they're #3 most impoverished city in the country. Rochester, where you had the Kodak and Xerox and all them, their graduation rate from high school is 42%. There's a direct corollary between poverty and education. We have to recognize that, and we have to know that we have to intervene with these kids early. And I also think nutrition.
Is it getting into the schools and talking to kids, or?
Oh yeah, you have to. I think we have to intervene with these kids. In Syracuse, at least in the last year or so ago, 91% of the kids, 91. Were below reading grade level by 3rd grade.
City of Syracuse school district. And
statistics show if that happens, the chance of ever catching up are very, very slim. So we have to intervene early with these kids.
Money? Do they need money?
Well, I mean,
throw money at it?
Well, it's not just throwing money at it. It's more like doing a different sort of targeted approach to kids in the inner city. That's why having a Common Core approach where one-size-fits-all testing isn't going to work. You can't teach a kid in the city of Syracuse the same way you teach them in an FM school district. You just can't. I mean, they have socioeconomic things that are quite different, and you have to reallocate resources to make sure that they're being intervened with at an early age, and nutrition's part of it.
So here's maybe a little bit more of a sensitive question. People in the suburbs might not be as impacted by the level of poverty in inner Syracuse. How do we get everybody engaged?
Well, I mean, you see some wonderful programs. Big Brothers Big Sisters is great. And by the way, they have about 50 or 60 kids on a waiting list for Big Brothers Big Sisters, so I encourage people to do that. The Guardian Angel Society, they do a phenomenal job. I went to one of their events, and they follow kids all the way through. And just think about it, if everybody who was more fortunate kind of took up the cause and helped out someone less fortunate, like a kid in the inner city, and kind of tucked them under their wing, it can make a big difference. I mean, even if you just encourage them. I had a buddy of mine, Apriana Sullivan, who just graduated from Lemoyne College.
Sure.
I met her, and she was from a very, very tough area. I gave her words of encouragement. I was a friend to her. I kind of talked to her, and I'm not saying I'm the reason she's graduating college, but doing that gave her some encouragement when it was tough for her. In those times when she had tough phone calls and she was down, giving her encouragement, telling her you're proud of her. The little things like that. If I did a little bit of that, could really help.
But from where you sit, too, just to follow up on that, is our local leadership doing everything that can be done in your view?
Oh, we can always do more.
Sure.
There's no question about it. We can always do more. And I think recognizing the problem is, like I said, step one. And we're doing a fairly good job of that here. There's a lot of good people in the community doing things, but we can always do more. And I think a lot more now is starting to be done about it, which is a good thing.
Let's talk about some maybe broader issues here as well. Terrorism, homeland security, which of course near and dear to everybody, but perhaps especially to you. We haven't had, Congressman, and I hate to even admit it, but we haven't really had a, quote, major event in this country in some time. Some worry that, we can start to get complacent again. Are you concerned about that?
I am concerned, but I would quarrel with you that we haven't had a major event. We had San Bernardino where 14 people were killed and 14 people were wounded, and you had Orlando where 50 people were killed, murdered, slaughtered.
It seems like some of France and some other countries getting a little more attention in that regard, right?
Yeah, and if I can digress for a moment, I was appointed head of what's called the Foreign Fighters Task Force as a freshman. It was quite an honor, and my job, they did it because of my prosecutorial background, but my job was to analyze the ISIS threat both in the United States and in Europe, and then to issue recommendations accordingly. And I went to Europe, I went to Israel, I went to Baghdad, I went to Turkey, and I went to Berlin and Brussels and France. Everywhere we went except Berlin has been a subject of major ISIS terrorist attacks since we've been there, which is scary in and of itself. But when we got back and we looked at the threat domestically, there's ISIS investigations in all 50 states. There's been ISIS attacks and attempted attacks all over the place. Just up the road in Rochester, it kind of slipped under the radar. New Year's Eve, they stopped a plan. The guy was just about ready to go act and shoot up a bar where a bunch of kids were celebrating New Year's Eve.
Right.
So it's here.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with it?
But here's what's odd for me. We don't hear much about the Taliban any longer. They're done? Are they over?
Oh, no. They're still definitely operating in pockets within the Middle East and within North Africa as well.
Okay, and perhaps, I hate to admit it, maybe this reflects my own ignorance, but prior to hearing about the Taliban, I never heard about the Taliban, never even heard ISIS until all of a sudden. Even if we do put a dent in these groups or eliminate them, doesn't somebody else pop up?
They do, but you got to understand one thing. We didn't hear about Al-Qaeda very much until we got caught with our eyes closed on 9/11. We don't ever want that to happen again, where thousands of Americans are killed in a terrorist attack. So we have been ever vigilant, and I can tell you there's thousands of people working every day, night and day, to keep this country safe. So it's still a major issue with Congress. We're doing a better job anticipating the next threat. And the next threat is most definitely ISIS. It's here, and they have acted here, and there's no doubt that they want to do more here. So we have to be vigilant about it. And we're doing a pretty good job. We could do a lot better. How much of a problem, though, is it combating this with technology, the internet? I mean, my gosh, you get these homegrown, I don't want to say a bad word, but these homegrown people that inflict some type of terrorist act because they're on the internet getting cues or whatever. That is exactly what our task force found was the biggest problem. And it's quite simply this. ISIS has... Al-Qaeda kind of looks for like the big, huge splash, like a plane crashing into a building or bringing down a jetliner. ISIS is perfectly happy with someone creating mayhem in the community. So what they do is they find that disaffected person on the internet who they think they can exploit, and maybe they're mad at the world for whatever reason. And they get them to say, here's how you make a bomb, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. Now, what they do it on the internet, but what they do is they encourage them to, once they see some interest on the open internet, they get them to go to these secure sites like Snapchat or whatever it is. And on those secure sites, the U.S. cannot monitor them, even with court orders, because they don't have the companies don't have technology to allow them to monitor. But our country built all that. Can't they come up with a way of, what was that big controversy? They couldn't break into somebody's Apple phone. My goodness. Well, that was in San Bernardino. The San Bernardino terrorist phone was rigged so you couldn't get into it. Well, Apple didn't want to help because they didn't want to create a backdoor for their secure systems. So the U.S. Couldn't somebody have done that behind the scenes? And do I need to know that? Correct. The U.S. figured out how to do it. Now, what we're doing in Homeland Security is we're getting these groups together, and they do want to try and find a way to work with us. the private companies, but they're concerned that if they create a back door, that it allows more people to do cyber attacks.
So airport security, seems like we've addressed the issue of bringing stuff on planes. But the TSA seems to be overwhelmed, and I hate to be so critical, but when you wait in line for an hour at LaGuardia for a 48-minute flight to Syracuse,
better off driving.
Well, for sure, but I mean, what can be done there?
Well, a lot's been being done. I'm chair. I'm one of the few freshmen out of the 57 freshmen, I believe, that it's got a chair of a subcommittee, and my subcommittee is direct oversight over TSA. We've had more hearings in TSA than any subcommittee in Homeland Security, and perhaps any in Congress. And the reason for that is it needs a lot of work, and the TSA needs a lot of oversight. Not just with respect to wait lines, which are important because that's a prime target for a terrorist group because they look for large masses of people, and you don't want to have them masked up.
Sure,
it's a very big thing.
Yeah.
Look, that's what happened in Brussels at the airport.
Yes.
But it's also about keeping the airlines safe themselves and the employees. And I don't know if you know this, employees in airports get screened far less than people visiting the airport to get on an airplane. And they have daily access to secure areas of airports, and it's a real problem. I'll give you a quick example.
So that's not troubling to you?
Well, it is troubling because I passed legislation that addressed it. But a guy got off the plane coming from Atlanta to LaGuardia, and getting off the plane, they somehow stumbled across the fact that he had a backpack full of guns on the plane, loaded. 14 9mm guns and 2 assault rifles.
I didn't. That was in the press?
Yeah, it was about a year ago. His 10th trip. Over 150 guns he'd taken up this way. And he did it simply because an employee in Atlanta walked into the secure area, never gets searched, hands a backpack full of guns to him, and he gets on a plane, goes up to New York and sells them on the street. If he decides to break bad on the plane, the mayhem. So it was a huge gap. We passed something called the Access Control Act out of the House, and part of it has made it into law, part of the FAA bill. So we're making progress, but there's a lot more needs to be done with TSA.
Let's switch gears. Go back to what we were friendly arguing about. I just made the comment to you, manufacturing's gone. You say maybe not. So as we look at the local economy, which is always near and dear to me, what can be done? And obviously improving that helps the whole poverty issue for sure, but what are you looking at?
I think it's a key way to address the poverty issue. You can't just throw money at the poverty issue. I mean, you've got to have the resources for these people, of course, but you have to create opportunity. And the opportunity is not minimum wage jobs. The opportunity is to get real opportunities for them to advance.
Incidentally, it was a state thing, I realized, but were you in favor of raising the minimum wage?
Yeah, if it doesn't kill jobs. But when you raise the minimum wage, every employer I've talked to has said they're cutting jobs. So unless you have relief on some side for employers, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I think that's not smart. Anyways, get back to manufacturing.
Go.
I've been to many manufacturers here. I can't tell you how many, and I just got the endorsement of MACNY, Manufacturers Association, and Chamber of Commerce. The companies that are left here manufacturing are lean and mean, and they've gone through the shakeout over the last 20 years to make them ultra competitive, and they're surviving with one hand tied behind their back, and that is they're paying double or sometimes triple the taxes that manufacturers all over the industrialized world are paying. For example, in Europe, in England, they pay about 12%, and it's going down. And a lot of them are also subsidized. I'm not calling for subsidies, I'm not calling for that low a tax rate, but our tax rate here is 35 to 39% for manufacturing. If we somehow can adjust that downward and close the loophole so everyone's paying their fair share, the manufacturers will come back here in droves. And if you incentivize the trillions of dollars that have gone overseas and left here, incentivize them to come back, I think they will come back, and I think we're poised to grow here.
So how do you do that? I mean, who's going to argue with that, but how do you do it?
Oh, there's a lot of argument about it because a lot of factors in the political world will simply demonize companies for leaving instead of looking at why are they leaving.
Right.
You know, they want to keep their jobs afloat. They don't want to be living in Indonesia. They don't want to be living in China. They want to be back here.
And what about the small? I mean, maybe we don't need, or we'd like it. Maybe we're not going to get back. I was an old Allied Chemical employee way back in the day, or Crucible's smaller now, new process, new venture gear. But the smaller manufacturers, we can encourage them somehow. Yeah,
well, the like the Crucibles of the world, they're fighting with two arms tied behind their back. One is the manufacturing rate, and number two is the price supports that foreign steel is sending into the United States. That's not right. We've got to level the playing field from a trade standpoint. We've got to stop entering into trade deals where the manufacturers in this country are getting screwed. And what we've got to do is if we level the playing field even remotely, the American workforce is so good, and we would really be poised to do well. And those manufacturers are ready to come back, I think. But think about trillions of dollars coming back into our economy that are overseas now. It would really have a boom for our economy.
Yeah, it's just, my gosh, no one does anything anymore around here without some type of huge tax incentive or pilots and all of that. Maybe just a little reduction in the overall rate.
But close the loopholes too. So in other words, the GEs of the world are paying their fair share. Just like the Braun Manufacturing here is a great company, is paying their fair share. They're doing a great job, and they're ready to boom. But they're going against international competition when they're paying much higher rate in taxes.
I love it, but we're running a little late, so let me do the lightning round here with you, okay?
That's where I get in trouble.
No, you won't get in trouble. So we did a program a while back on consensus, that study that talks about consolidation of services between the city of Syracuse County, Onondaga County. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's not a federal issue per se, but you must weigh in on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, the particular details I can't pretend to understand, but I can say if the goal of consensus is to find government efficiencies, I'm all for that. Now, if that whether that means consolidating or not, I think that's for the people to decide, and we're nowhere near that point yet. But I think having a discussion about how we can make things more efficient is not a bad idea. And when you drive from one end of the county to the other and you go through like 17 different police jurisdictions, do you really need that?
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that we could discussions we should
So item 2, and my 2 daughters, they're probably just old enough where we missed all of the Common Core stuff, but I had a lot of friends, parents of children who were up in arms about Common Core. You weren't a fan.
I think one size fits all doesn't work, like I've said, and I think that Washington should not be dictating how local school teachers teach and local school districts teach, because every school district's different, and they have different socioeconomic issues, they have different budget issues, they have different...
But you need some standards, though, don't you?
No doubt. You have general standards and let them go from there. I'm happy to say Common Core is no longer mandatory. The states have a lot more options than they had before because of the comprehensive education reform we passed, which I advocated for. So we're going in the right direction. I think the federal government should provide funding and some guidelines, but you can't micromanage from Washington. I don't want a bureaucrat tell my kid how to learn.
I understand. Another big project eventually here in Syracuse is the Interstate 81 project. Now your infrastructure, transportation, it's right up your alley. Any updates there for us?
Yes. I got on transportation because of 81, the Transportation Committee in Washington, and I was a big mouth on it, to say the least. I wormed my way onto the conference committee that was melding the transportation bills from the House and Senate, and I was able to, 1, restore funding for Central, which is very important, but number 2, advocate that 81 be considered a high priority corridor. There's not many in the United States. That's going to be one of them. So that means priority in funding and priority in environmental impact review. So those 2 things would be critical to the timely success of 81 and whatever iteration becomes.
Any idea when we'll see something happen there?
Well, they're doing all the environmental impact work now.
Right.
I think by sometime next year we're going to get an idea what it's going to look like.
Related to that, I guess, is infrastructure issues that we have in the city of Syracuse. I work downtown, and I'll tell you, I'm not exaggerating by much when I say almost every day there's a water main break. Now, it's great, everyone likes to build parks and, the feel-good stuff. Repairing a sewage line isn't glamorous, but the stuff's crumbling. And thankfully, it was put in by, I guess, immigrants a century ago. They did a good job.
Or more.
But it's falling apart. And Stephanie Miner, Mayor Miner, will say, this is a big problem, but, it's not like she's awash in cash right now to fix all of that.
Right.
Can the federal government help?
Well, there are some programs in the federal government, and I've spoken to her about them. For whatever reason, they're not what they can afford or handle right now. The days of earmarks are over, and you just can't get funding for specific projects. There's grant processes to some extent. There's low interest or no interest loans that are possibly available. But it's the days.
But this is a problem that won't go away and won't get better.
Right. I mean, I think they've got to make some decisions in the city too as to how they want to pay for it. I mean, and how some cities are going to having private entities come in and take over the water systems, and then allow them to have a taxing authority to basically say.
I know everybody's after the same thing, but again, to your point, bringing in more businesses, creating more jobs, it's more revenue all around. It's win-win-win, but tough to do.
Right. Well, it's not impossible. I mean, you got to think outside the box. Maybe private enterprise's way. Maybe taking a look at what the structure is and then the fee structure is in the city is part of it. You have to take a look at it.
This has been to say the least, an interesting election season at the presidential level. If I may say, sir, you did not exactly embrace the Republican candidate for presidency, and I just wonder, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, there's the election is going on, the process is going on, and what I've seen so far is not what I can fully support. I'm not out there hammering him every day or having press conferences where I disagree with him. This is more of a personal thing for me. It's rhetoric.
You've been a bit more of an independent on certain issues,
it's rhetoric,
correct? Is that fair?
stylistic. Yeah, I mean, I have 13 bills pass the House. And that's more than any freshman and more than most congressmen this term, and maybe more than any freshman in history of Congress. And I have 6 of those bills been signed into law. And it's because I've reached across the aisle. Instead of focusing on people criticizing me, I'm focusing on people who want to work with me. And every single bill I have passed, a Democrat's a primary sponsor.
Quickly,
and
though,
that's how you get things done.
Sure. Quickly, though, on this issue, be it Trump or even to another extent, the Bernie Sanders movement. Doesn't that say something to you, though, just about the voting public?
Sure.
Like, everyone just sort of had it, kind of thing, right?
Oh, I've had it too. That's why I gave up a career I loved. I loved being a prosecutor, and I was pretty successful at it. And it's not easy for my family for me to do it, be away from home. But I felt so strongly about the state of things that I wanted to go to Washington and try and make a difference. And I dare say I'm making a difference. And if more people like me go down there, maybe we'll make more of a difference.
With respect to Congressman, I would say I've become kind of a fan of term limits, but a 2-year term for Congress seems too short. It seems like you guys are always running.
Yeah, I think in the day when they created Congress, back in the day, it was an agrarian society. 97% were farmers, I believe, and they took a couple months a year, went to Washington, did some work, and then they went back and tended to the farms. It's a full-time job and then some now. I'm a firm believer in term limits and a firm believer that maybe another year or two per term for Congress would probably, before you have to run for re-election, would make sense.
Looking back, looking ahead, you're kind of getting close to wrapping up your first full term in Congress. Biggest disappointment, biggest frustration so far?
The biggest frustration is trying to deal with the intransigence on both sides. There's a certain sect on both sides, or group on both sides, that are 100% or nothing. And the biggest frustration I have is our system of government wasn't built on I want 100% or nothing. It was built on bipartisanship, it was built on consensus. And so there's a bunch of us in the middle that are working towards that. So it's frustrating, but it's not impossible to get things done. And the number of bills I've had passed is proof of that.
Sure. And maybe that leads into the next question again, and after the first term. Biggest sense of pride, biggest accomplishment? What do you feel best about?
The biggest sense of pride is, I think, saying that I was going to go down there and I was going to get things done, and I've got things done, and thank God we got a highway bill passed, a long-term one, because I made a campaign promise about that, so thank God. And now I think that's my biggest sense of pride, is that I've done what I said I was going to do, and that was be bipartisan and work hard and be independent when necessary, but also...
you take a little flack from the Republican Party for being somewhat more independent?
Oh, sure, but I take flack from the Democrats too. So I think when a little bit of everybody's mad at you, you're probably doing okay, I guess.
What's the biggest worry you have, the biggest concern, say, over the next couple of years?
I think two: the debt and the safety of our country. Those are the two biggest concerns I have, by far.
Do you think on the debt issue, because I have a day job, do you think some would criticize the Federal Reserve for sort of artificially keeping the economy propped up and low interest rates and all of that? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do have some concerns. I don't pretend to know all the I'm not the best numbers guy, but although I did work at the Securities and Exchange Commission, so I understand markets a bit.
Sure.
I am concerned about that. I'm concerned what happens when the music stops and there's not enough chairs, and what's going to happen to the economy then. And I think some of the structural things we need to deal with, we have to have the courage to deal with.
Congressman John Katko, thank you very, very much. A reminder to those of you watching that you can visit us online at foxsyracuse.com. Click on the central icon and send us your questions, comments, any criticisms. I do get some bad email once in a while.
So
I know you do. But we welcome all of your comments, foxsyracuse.com. Congressman, it was a pleasure having you in studio. Nice to meet you and spend this time with you. I know you've been busy. Hopefully we'll have you back soon. But
absolutely. It went fast.
Yeah, well, it's quick. Yes, it is. That's our program for today. From all of us here at Central on Fox 68 and My 43, I'm Daniel Pluff. Thank you for watching. I'm Daniel Pluff. Watch Central for people and topics of local interest. That's Central here on Fox 68 and My 43.